Well, welcome to our very first episode of Culture Conversations. And I have my good friend here, Chris from Hereticals, doing his new series, Heretical Cast. And I've got a history with him doing Six Pack that you all may be familiar with. Some great conversations. But I wanted to bring him on to talk about the Raelians, because Chris, we've actually covered that before, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. We've spoken about the Raelians. We did a multi-part series over on Hereticals, I think, about a year or so ago with Jay. That sort of went into it. But it's an interesting one for me, the Raelians, because it's a group I've actually got a history with. So which I have no doubt we'll get into.
Yes, we definitely will. But first, I want to talk about like the Raelians particular because you're also a historian. I don't know how many people really know that about you, but you're well versed in history. You find it fascinating. You're well educated on it, and so you know a lot more about the Raelians than even I do after doing that 6-part series. But I guess basically,
I'm a historian. Whether I'm well versed or not, I guess that's subjective. I can waffle on enough to make it sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do know that I went to you a lot for the fact. Just a brief history of how it started. It's from Claude Vorilhon, was exploring the outside of a volcanic crater in France in 1974, when he claims that a saucer-like vehicle containing UFO type aliens that he calls the Elohim approached him and spoke to him about them being another race from somewhere else, a planet outside of the solar system, but close to the Milky Way, actually giving him the truth. And they talked for a while and enchanted him, and then asked him to come back the next day with of all things, a Bible. And so the Raëlian scripture started with these Elohim telling this Claude Vorilhon, who is now called Raël, who started this organization, this cult. It's a UFO-based cult, kind of free love and science. I mean, it's got a lot going for it if you think about cults. I mean, it's got a little bit of everything.
It's come out of the hippie movement in a way. But, so Claude Vorilhon, I guess to essentially put it in a nutshell, the Elohim. So Elohim is actually a Hebrew word from the Bible. So in the original Genesis, so Elohim directly translates to those who came from the sky, which is one of the names for God. But, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth is the start. So that's where the name Elohim comes from. So what Claude's claimed is that, like you said, in the 70s, he was, just exploring in the middle of France, as you do, when a UFO landed, and they revealed to him that essentially biblical events and happenings were actually misinterpretations of aliens, alien involvement in ufology. It's kind of reads like a series of ancient aliens in a way.
A lot of it was like science, right? Like this really is, it's just a misinterpretation of some scientific notion and add aliens, like from what I see.
To an extent. I mean, look, a lot of it can be historically disproven because we can disprove a lot of elements of the Bible, and in particular the ones that they use. So essentially the claim is that the Elohim created all life on Earth. They designed it. So it was genetic design, and then they've placed us here with the animals, and then they've sort of had a hand in history all the way along up until about 2,000 years ago with the death of Jesus, and then they decided to come back they did a few things. They've also claimed that he's the Maitreya of Buddhism, and I think they've claimed.
Well, that goes to their 40 prophet belief, that there are 40 prophets, and one of them's Jesus, one of them's Muhammad, one of them's Buddha, and apparently Raël, who is Claude, is number 40. Of
course. Well, every religion has a tendency to claim that their prophet is the last prophet. Essentially, as you delve into it, the aliens or the Elohim tell Claude a the story and have him bring the Bible, and they link certain events to it and tell it in a way that's like, for instance, Sodom and Gomorrah was hydrogen bombs.
Right.
The Noah's Ark was actually, it was a spaceship with genetic samples.
It was. They actually solved the problem I had with the Bible. They told me it really wasn't two animals each that came in. It was a cell from each one, and we brought it on a ship. And I'm like, well, that makes more sense to me, actually, than fitting 2 by 2 all in an ark.
Ironically, it would make a lot more sense, but that doesn't.
It did, because, science, it just made a little more sense. But that's what I mean. This one has everything, because when you think about what was happening in the 70s back then, there was Hiroshima. There was, they also believed that we're in a nuclear post-apocalyptic state, the whole world, since Hiroshima. Then there was also the hippie movement, like you said, free love and everything is in there. But that also in the 70s, in the 50s and 60s and up into the 70s, more people were saying that they were greeted by UFO aliens. And the stories are all kind of similar, Look,
I don't discount. I guess I hold an agnostic opinion on alien encounters. I've heard too many stories to make me completely discount it, but I do question a lot of it. I think there's a lot of BS thrown in, and I'm also mindful of the fact that ufology is something I was interested in for a very long time, especially growing up. Who didn't watch the X-Files back in the day?
Well, true, and to think that we're alone when our planet, in many ways, for me, is quite sophisticated. To think that we're the only ones out there is kind of narrow-minded.
Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. I think it would be very unlikely that we're alone, whether there's other advanced civilizations or whether there's, the grey aliens of, that you see depicted in, modern culture. I don't know, but it's maybe there is, maybe there isn't. There's a lot of things that have been disproven, debunked, but there's a lot of things that are genuinely unexplained. So I think
one thing's for certain is Raël really hit on a nerve with culture at the time, and he's got a pretty good big following too. At one point there were 90,000 Raëlians.
I think it actually went a bit higher than that. I think it was it hit the 200,000s. So what happened was in the early 2000s. So one of the big things that the Raëlians have always focused on, and actually I'm probably skipping a little bit.
Hey, we could go back.
Yeah, but they focused on cloning and science, and they're very big on that. And they had a company called Clonaid that was headed up by a lady called Dr. Bridget Basilia, who in the early 2000s claimed to have cloned a human child, cloned a girl called Eve, and it made headlines, and I guess that's how I first came across them, because it was, I thought, who is this? They're saying a UFO group, and I had to look into it, and they had a lot of interesting things. I was right into that whole ancient aliens. I was a bit of a fan of Eric von Daniken at the time, and I'm also going to preface this by saying I was in my very early 20s. So
it had everything going for you. Really.
Yeah, look, it was ticking a lot of boxes for me. Needless to say, I was a young adult at the time. And I thought that was interesting, and I had a look, and, they were in Sydney, which was where I lived at the time. And I sort of sent something through going, yeah, cool. It's, would you like to, they just had a thing on their website, a very basic website back in the day, of course. But it was, would you, find out more and, to get the book, and I thought, I'll get it. Anyway, then they had my contact details. Got a phone call. Yeah, we've got a thing on, which wasn't too far from where I lived. Come along. And, myself and a couple of friends went along. And it was an interesting experience. So, well, I mean, we can go there now, or if we can.
First I want to premise that the Raëlians separates itself into. It's got several groups, like you said, the Clonaid part, which they started to go into science and to start with the cloning part, because they do believe that they can make a master race. Okay.
Yeah.
of Elohim. Okay. And that is a basic interest in. And the woman who is heading that up, you said her name was
Bridget Basilier.
Yeah, she is actually she's going to be she's listed as the successor after Raël goes off to wherever it is that he goes. Yeah. She's actually listed as the successor now.
I'll say this: she's a very nice lady, very lovely lady,
and quite intelligent. But I don't know about the clone. But yeah,
well, I question the legitimacy of a lot of things.
I don't think they've proved that the clone is out there. Like, they won't do it. So
no,
like,
and they're
that kind of
they won't. And look, my attitude, I think that she's someone who is very, very dedicated to Raël. She's someone who's very dedicated to the cause, and in my opinion, I believe that she has lied for the cause.
I think so also, because she thinks she might be doing good for the organization. It's still quite a popular organization. It's not as big as it was, but it's still very active. Like, you go to the website, they have events everywhere, all over.
Oh, absolutely.
They're still in many countries. I just saw that they had a large infiltration of them in Ireland recently. And, in your country, even in my country, there's plenty of people that are signing up for it.
Japan is probably one of the places they've got the biggest.
Yeah.
Japan, Canada, and France. Because
are they still out of Quebec? I think they moved from France. Their main location was in France for the longest time.
They were in France for quite a while. I think he had some legal issues over there, so I'm not too sure.
Well, scholars were coming forward to try to figure out if it really qualified as a religion. Like, I've been watching that debate back and forth. And I think most countries are just saying it's a sect. They're not calling it a cult.
Even
not calling it a true religion.
The Raëlians would call it, they would say, yeah, look, we're a cult. And there's nothing wrong with that. A cult is, a small religious organization with one leader at the top. They said, and the argument used to be the Catholic Church is a cult. It's just a really big one.
Right. And with the Raelians, their actual scripture are these writings that Raël has put in his notebook, has put together based on what he says the Elohim told him about the things that he found in the Bible, and went over everything, and he writes them out. I think that's what we covered in at Hereticals when we did the series. We read quite a few of them and tried to interpret it. It was quite interesting. Very interesting.
There's some blatant errors in there, and he released the second book not long after. So the first book was the book. Oh, that came out in 1974. La Livre qui dit la vérité, which is the book that tells the truth. In French. It's and then he so in the second book he corrects a few things, like for instance the obvious one is that the Elohim home planet was 1 light year away, which we know it's not 1 light year away, because
it can't be.
It's just there's nothing that close to us. And then it was kind of like, well, yeah, but we didn't want you to really know where our home world was, because, we're afraid you'll come and get us, even though, this is the group of people that supposedly created all humanity thousands of years ago. Why they'd be worried about, a world that isn't even united and has no interstellar spaceflight is beyond me. And then it was, and also, the way that things bend, and it's not quite as, it's too complicated to explain to you simple.
Exactly. So, and that is the thing that is very common, which puts it definitely in the cult category for me, which is why we're talking about it, because number one, it has one person up the top with different beliefs that they're trying to get everyone else to sign on board. They've got a whole backstory about it. They've got a book or a scripture or a guideline to go with it. Okay. Yeah. And then they've got this hierarchy. Okay. But for me, it's not so much that they have their own language or anything like that, but for me, they actually have their own type of lifestyle, which is promoted on actually what makes Claude comfortable. For one, the separate organization within the organization called the Order of Angels, which is all the women. which in there they have hierarchies too. They make them pink and white and gold and give them labels onto how they can use their feminine wiles in sexuality. White ones are free to actually deal with people from the outside somewhat and bring people in. Okay. The pink are reserved only for the Elohim. Too much, and they just like for special occasions. And the gold or the top actually have no activity whatsoever, except for they ought to stay and practice and learn the best way to entice an alien. And only Rael can teach them. And this is so cult-like for me.
Yeah, it's yes and no. That's somewhat.
But the most offensive part is
that's not quite how it works in practice. So
no, not in practice, which you're going to get to with the story. I hope.
So I guess to jump back, part of there, and I guess to explain why the Order of Angels exists, you've got to understand one of the goals, which is the Raelians were told by, or Rael was told by the Elohim that once there was 1% of the population on the planet was Raelian, and an embassy was built, then they would come down and basically reveal themselves to the world. So the Raelians have been trying to build an embassy. They sought to build an embassy it was always going to be Jerusalem, but they were having, the Israelis were having none of it. I think they've got enough religions in Israel. They weren't going to add an extra one. And certainly not, the Raelians tend to be fairly far left-leaning, very anti-Israel, pro-Palestine, ironically. So they were never, ever going to have that entertained. Then they were looking at building one in Quebec. But once again, it was just, they're asking for free land to build an alien embassy. No one's going to give it to them.
Right.
But the idea is that the Order of Angels, because they're very much free love and very open, very, very open. Like, it's one thing that I observed when I was around them. There was a lot of before, I won't say before the LGBT community was accepted, but certainly the acceptance wasn't at a level anywhere near where it is now. You know, this was back in it was back in the time where, you know, people would be called derogatory terms for being you know, anything but straight. So, you know, it was certainly a very different time, but it was because of the openness about sexuality within the group, there was a lot of LGBT people there. There was a lot of people who I guess were, you know, open or into a swinging lifestyle, things along those lines. It certainly appealed to a lot of people like that. So it was a very interesting group for the time, I think, to say. It was, you know, we're going back 20 years and it was, see, I think it's hard. I mean, for me, even when I think back 20 years, it's hard for me to comprehend how different the world was then and how different things were accepted, you know, compared to today. I think it's almost like a foreign country. So it was interesting for the time. But the idea with the embassy was that the hierarchy of angels were there essentially in the same way the nuns were all married to Jesus. The angels would be there for the Elohim, and that's the way it was. And part of what was revealed to Rael was, in fact, he was half alien himself. His father was his father, but he was half alien, and he was the brother of Jesus, who's also an alien, of course. So technically, he's Elohim.
So technically he is. So I see where you're correcting me then. So he's actually instructing them on Elohim practices.
And look, I think it's technically the certain levels will only, but it's very much a
It's still a man building a fantasy world in a cult environment to please.
But there's no limitations on the limitations were there, I believe, around the time of the HIV scare and things like that. And I think that was more a self-preservation thing for old Claude. He didn't want to get anything.
You know what? That's a good point that I actually had come across myself, that I thought that like this whole, because every article in regards to Raelians will bring up their sexual freedom thinking. The sexual experimentation is part of this culture still to this day. Their acceptance of all different lifestyles that way, sexual freedom and all. So in order to protect himself, coming from like the late 70s, 80s into like, of course, you'd have to build a hierarchy of some type.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I think that, there's probably a little bit of narcissism and ego in there.
He's a cult leader that doesn't just for all of those that may not get it, that really doesn't need to be explained. He definitely has narcissistic tendencies. He built a whole fantasy world around himself successfully.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he's, look, I'll put it this way. Gold, white, pink, they're all doing the same thing.
They are. They're just different feathers around their necks, so to speak.
It's more of a ranking thing. And like any organization, there's a hierarchy. And
there is. And what fascinates me is how forward-thinking the group appears to be. As you listen to Raël, and he'll tell you, like, we are the most forward-thinking that they are. We've got the future in hand. We're all leading to the golden tomorrow, And yet, if
they've attached themselves to some, I think, worthy causes. And even I remember when Jay was looking at Jay sort of saying, look, they're harmless. They're not really...
They don't hurt anybody. They've got no legal cases against them.
I think like most religions, that they do, and that's the reality. There's a lot of broken people within there who are taken advantage of, in my opinion. Also, I think like any religion, shunning is a thing. I'll personally vouch for that one. Shunning is a thing. But I think there's a lot of broken people who are probably taken advantage of in order to grow the movement. They're very clever in finding their targets. I'll put it that way.
Well, one part that really doesn't sit well with me, based on the fact that it's 2023 and they still promote this, is that and it's probably because I am a woman of a certain age, that in the order of the angels, if you age out beyond your best of years at your most beautiful, you're no longer attractive to the Elohim. And you're demoted to be only a teacher. And I found that, wait a minute, but this is supposed to be a higher being. Okay?
There's a loophole. There's a loophole there.
So this higher being really only goes to man masculinity thinking here of like, at 25, we're our best in child rearing and all of that.
I guess what I'm about to explain for that, you need to understand their concept of life after death. Now, life after death is essentially cloning. So if you are every year they have what's called a transmission, which is where all the Raelians gather, and they kind of stand in a circle, put water on their foreheads, and essentially what that is they're saying there's a UFO up there, and it's you essentially transmitting your brain pattern to them by doing this. So they know where all the Raelians are, and they're essentially, because you're in the group, they're going to get a copy of your brain, your memory, everything. So if you were to die, what will happen is they will clone you, and they've got your memory there saved on file. So so that's the life after death concept. Now with the angels who age out, yes, they're teachers, but they're still encouraged to be as active as they can and encourage the younger ones, because what will happen is they will be cloned back into their younger bodies and with their memories intact. So they will be essentially, they just continue on. So they'll be in their younger bodies forever doing what it is they do.
It sounds like a Black Mirror episode. Charlie Brooker wrote it. at your perfect point in your life where you felt your strongest, your most beautiful, you were having the time of your life, and you just stay there forever, you know?
Yeah, well, and then it's a similar thing. I guess the thought behind the Elohim is that once they get to that point where they're a little bit older and things are starting to break down, essentially they transmit their memory and die and are in the new body at their peak and at their healthiest. So, so essentially, you know, is like they even talk about the sports on the Elohim planet is like ultra violent, where people will die, but then you just reclone. So it's just like it doesn't matter.
They have some good things too, like this. What they call sensual meditation is really just like relaxation mode, where with sex. Eventually, they want you to have what they call in cosmic orgasm. They want you to like bond with the idea of the Elohim in the perfect universe. And he speaks to you in quite erotic tones while you're relaxing. You're relaxing, laid out, and it's a whole room full of people. But did you actually experience that when you actually were there? Did they go through those daily routines? Did you get to see any of that?
Look, to an extent, not with him talking, I can assure you. Okay, so I probably need to jump back a little bit. Let's jump back to I've gone to my first Raëlian meeting or encounter and I've taken two friends of mine, both female friends, who and just friends, nothing more. I've never had any interest in them. Anyway, we get there and I think it would probably be fair to say that I was probably the youngest male there who was straight. I'd probably say there was mainly women there. The majority of those within the group were women. There was the younger guys tended to be guys who would go both ways, or you know, it was or just gay. And there was a lot of older straight men, I think, from who had probably been with it since the 70s. Now, part of their recruitment strategy, I guess you could say, is to look. I was a young 20-year-old guy, and I was getting a lot of attention from attractive women, a variety of women who had very open ideas on sexuality, which is something I hadn't really encountered. You know, I went along because I had an interest in ufology and things along those lines, and this was something that had genuinely interested me. And there was certainly that aspect. That aspect was covered. And then afterwards, when it's the sort of the everyone socializing, it was a very, very friendly environment for me. And that I was right in it. The girls
had to be enticing. I mean, it had to be enticing. It had to be, you're just overwhelmed with everything. And of course, at your age, in the climate that it was, I mean, God would be like a dream come true for a little bit of time. Like, I
had no competition. in that group. I essentially had no competition. I mean, I'd taken two girls with me. One never went back. She just kind of went, look, not for me. That was interesting, and that's fine. The other one went back one or two times, but I think that she probably look, me and her never had any interest in each other, and would never go there. And it was, I think she it might have made her a little bit uncomfortable overall.
Well, granted, if that's not the situation, and then all of a sudden that's the situation, it could be quite uncomfortable.
Yeah. So, and look, it was nothing that was ever going to happen there. But when I look back at it, and nothing happened with me and her, but I sort of look back and think, well, I can see now that there was possibly some pressure for her in a way, which is where I think there's issues within the group. Now, look, in retrospect, most of the women who were there, they were more than happy to be there. That was their lifestyle, and that was fine.
Right.
However, I think that I think there was, in retrospect, there was probably a lot of pressure. I think there was pressure, and look, I obviously wasn't the only young straight guy there. But I think there was pressure on everyone. There was pressure on the girls to be involved. There was pressure on myself and other young straight guys to be involved. You know, but certainly there was a lot of pressure on.
I can see that. I could see that just the whole situation and not, you know, you're young and they're like, well, why not? It's free. It's this. It's all, you know, don't be inhibited. You know, this is what we all strive for, to be able to express ourselves without judgment and all of that. And yet, if you're not used to it and you're going in there, you're just like, okay, but like, you know, it's not exactly as freeing as you think, right? You think, oh, wouldn't that be great? It's so free. It's really not.
For me as a 19, 20-year-old, very inexperienced, I won't say I hadn't lived, you know, in a cave and was unaware of what happened in the world, but I'd never I was in a fairly conservative area. You know, I sort of lived in a beachside region where there was a certain lifestyle, and it was what it was. And then all of a sudden, I'm sort of being exposed to something very different, which for a 20-year-old, look, I thought I was in heaven. You know, it was
exactly. It's
I'd go to these things and they'd you know, it's like I put it this way: I'd go out to a club with my friends, and I'd spend half the night, you know, buying drinks, and this is before Tinder and swiping right and left. You know, I'd be going out buying drinks. You know, you'd be trying to, you know, you try to meet people, meet girls, and you know, it was always that awkward dance. If you were interested in someone, were they interested in you? And then someone might have been interested in you. You weren't interested in them. The whole nightclub, you know, or going out thing. But I'd go to a Raëlian event, and I'd. You know,
and none of that is there. No work, no effort. It's just all there.
It wouldn't be a case of, gee, am I going to score tonight?
It's like a given.
It was, I am going to. The question is how many, and that was literally so for me as a 20-year-old guy, very, very naive to the world. This was just like,
it had to be quite intriguing and intoxicating. And I'm surprised you made it out of there, Chris, actually, because I mean, I have brothers and I can't imagine any of them, as different as they are, wanting to leave that situation and have to go to the world where now they've got to actually, you know, work at it again.
Yeah. And look, there's pressure involved, and what might have seemed like a good thing to start with actually kind of
the reality of it. It's not you know, it goes from being kind of like a fantasy or something like, wouldn't that be nice if it was this easy, into like, oh my God, it's this easy, and like
point for me was there was someone senior who had come down, and look, she was a very attractive woman. I'll say that. She was a very attractive woman. But I believe she was 50. And look, for me as a 20-year-old, or, you know, I'd been there for about a year, but early 20s, she just wasn't someone who I was interested in. But the pressure was put on, and for me to, and I ended up, you know, we did get together, but it was kind of like the pressure was on because, you know, I was the young buck who was there, and you know, something special had come down. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment for me of, oh, hang on, if that's happened to me, it's happening to the girls.
It's happening to them too, right?
And it was a bit of it was just a thing for me where it was, no, okay. And I started to get a lot more mindful. And I'd had a situation, look, I mean, a few of my friends caught on to what was going on, and they always wanted to get an invite and come along.
Of course, yeah.
And you know, there was one time that I took a few of them along, and they would. It was funny because they hadn't actually joined up. They got zero attention because they weren't
really part of the group, so they weren't accepted yet.
Yeah,
right?
They didn't have the necklace, and you know, so it'd be like they'd be getting asked, oh yeah, so how long have you been a Raëlian? And I know this is my first time here, and they sort of get a bit of okay, and it's just here with my friend. I'm not really.
And so the enticing begins because you approached it differently. You actually reached out to them first through the website, through the whole thing. Yeah. So you became a part of it where you're just bringing someone along, they're going to be considered an outsider at first.
Yeah, and look, I had a genuine interest in it. I had a genuine. I found it intriguing. I really did. The ufology, the mythology, the religion. I didn't know a lot about religious beliefs at the time, apart from the surface kind of stuff that most people know. So it filled a lot of gaps for me. But then they're very quick on one thing they're very good at picking up on is people who are there for a genuine reason, and people who are just there to try and get laid, essentially, which I think was a few of my friends. And they just kind of they picked up on it pretty quick, and it was just like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen.
So besides this initiation or this ritual, the sensualization of the whole thing, how is their process for actually getting you their beliefs in that book, in his writings? Like, how is that process approached with someone when they join? Like, because you were there for a little bit. How did those discussions go? Like,
Well, back then, what happened? I guess the first meeting I went to, it was people sitting around and just talking about it and explaining things. And hey, do you have any questions? And here's the book. You bought the book. I think it was about $10 to buy the book. And we'll catch up again in a week. Have a read. And I read the book. And I came back with questions that were answered in a way that I was satisfied with. And it's just kind of, I guess it's like any kind of church group, I guess, in a way. It was just, I think that they picked up on that I was someone who was genuinely interested in it. And I think they picked up on that I was potentially someone who could be long-term within the organization. Someone who, and I guess, back when I was, 20 years ago, I wasn't a bad looking guy, it was, so I guess that was.
Well, your youth, your virile, your youth. And plus, if you're anything like you were now, you read that book and you actually did have questions when you went back.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what kind of things in the book that you saw that intrigued you, because I've read the book recently and maybe if I was your age, I would have found it a little more fascinating than I do now. But I couldn't really sink into any of it, actually. Like, I was just like...
Well, look, I guess I was a little bit naive about religion, apart from surface level stuff, and I was right into ufology. Like, it was that I loved it. Ancient alien sort of thinking and Von Daniken, chariots of the gods. I really had a genuine interest in a lot of that stuff. So, look, there was questions I had, such as it didn't make sense to me about the one light year. That's always the one that stuck out. They said, well, hey, here's the second book where it covers that and goes over it. And look, in all honesty, I don't think I ever really bought into it 100%. But I kind of understood and liked it enough that I was interested, and the attention I was getting was what kept me there. I mean, I went to that first meeting and got a lot of attention from a lot of women, and it was I naturally wanted to go back. Wanted to go back.
Of course,
I think it kind of the ego. Yeah, and look, I don't want this to come across like I'm some kind of figure or anything. It's pretty simple. I was a 20-year-old who suddenly was getting a lot of interest in a fairly easy way, and that absolutely appealed to the 20-year-old version of me. Look, also, I think that would appeal to most men.
Well, I think it's even bigger than that, because when you look at the whole thing about the Raëlians, it's got the UFOs, the aliens, okay, which at the time was very intriguing and still is to many people. Both of us will admit to being geeks when it comes to Star Trek and Star Wars and all of this space exploration. We follow NASA. We watch, all of a little more science-minded. We want to believe that there's more than just us. Like, there's the possibility. We want to explore it. So this actual cult kind of taps into that, especially for young men, and even women who want to actually believe there's more to our existence than just here.
The genuinely surprising thing was there wasn't a lot of young straight men in the group. You would see people.
Well, do you think that is that is, well, because there was the older ones, right, that came with Raël. Of course, when it first started, it was like a great thing, and it was like a hippie culture type thing, and then it grew. Do you think that it's purposely because of the lifestyle that it is? Do you think that they're weeding them out? Do you think it's a competition thing? Do you think young men actually come in with new ideas?
Not necessarily. I think that, look, possibly as we're moving into a more modern time, I think people are more aware. I think it would be very different now to what it was 20 years ago. A lot of the older guys were actually really, really cool people. They were, they were very open and they were happy to see someone younger. It was almost like someone they could pass the baton on to. I think they were very, they were really, really cool. Really,
and
cool.
I would imagine the conversations.
It wasn't a case of they saw this young bloke come in and go, this guy's,
Well, for conversation purposes, like you said, the pressure was there. So I imagine being in there, they've been there for quite a few years. The pressure had to be even momentous to them. It gets a bit tiring. You would think it would, because we all dream about this kind of situation where you don't have to worry about that. But it could be quite tiring for them. I would imagine they're bored with the whole thing.
I'm not going to lie. It was a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, of course.
But it was when I started to realize that there was probably some unfair pressure being placed, and I think there was a lot of the women. It was an interesting mix for the women. There was a lot of highly intelligent women who had a very open mind, were very open-minded to certain lifestyles. There was, and I'm talking like really intelligent. And then there was, I think, some women and young girls, and I'll say young girls as in, like, when I use that term, I'm talking like 18 plus. But I think there's definitely a distinction between an 18-year-old and a 30-year-old.
Right.
That were probably a little bit broken. I think they were probably.
You mean like normal cultish, looking for something, trying to fill in the pieces?
Yeah, they were looking for acceptance. They were looking for, they sort of came from not the best situations a lot of the time. They were looking for, and look, I was a little bit similar. I was, I had friends and stuff, but I was fairly lonely at that age. I lived on my own at 17. I had an interesting relationship with, I come from a good family, don't get me wrong, but, my parents divorced when I was 15, and that kind of spiraled me a bit, and it ended up with me living on my own at 17.
Well,
and
you know what? It's quite common.
But I was looking for, always looking for
to belong.
I guess, somewhere I could belong. People who would kind of take me in as part of the family, and I think there was that for a lot of the girls. And I think, look, they're young, they're good looking, and this is what happens in the group. And I think that they sort of felt pressure that if they wanted to belong, that's what they had to do. And I look back at that now, and I mean, look, there was never anything that was non-consensual. In fact, if there was ever even a hint of that, it was just stopped. And there was a big rule within: if someone wasn't interested,
then that was it.
No was no. And that was it. But then the interesting thing was the pressure I sort of felt with that older woman that time, that because, she was someone who was fairly high up and
revered into pressure.
I was the best option. And like I said, she was a very attractive woman. It was not a bad experience at all for me. But it was an uncomfortable one in the fact that it probably wasn't what I wanted to do.
Well, you didn't initiate it. You were in a situation for the first time where you weren't initiating something.
No, well, look, I knew that she was, and everyone was saying, there was a lot of pressure from a lot of the girls. Oh, you'll like her. You've got her. Oh, I think she'll like you. And I look back at it now, and I kind of go, oh, it was a setup. I was the young bloke there. She was coming, and it was just like, oh yeah, we've got a young bloke. You can run off with later.
Part of the whole thing.
Yeah,
I think
it's strange to look back on, because at the time I was naive enough to not realize it. It made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, and it started a bit of a path for me. But then I look back at it now and just go, it was actually pretty problematic. If I look at it through a modern lens, I would look back at that and say, yeah, that's just maybe the reason I was getting a lot of the attention was because they didn't want to go off with the older blokes. And look, and once again, it was very much had I have said no in that situation, that would have been fine. I could have said no, but it was manipulated in a way where there was certainly a lot of pressure. And I think that there was a lot of pressure placed on people who maybe look, there was people who that was their lifestyle, and that's cool. And there's absolutely no issues with that at all. But I think there were some people who, to belong, they got right outside their comfort zone.
Yes, and I think that's a good way to put it, because that's what definitely puts the Raelians in here rather than a religious sect or whatever, as an actual cult. Because of that groupthink and because of that pressure for certain things to happen within a group like that, the key words you use there are manipulation and pressure. Everybody kind of pushing you towards the same thing in order to be accepted. It makes it more a cult. And then the reason I use cult as one of the more damaging words rather than a sect or a religious belief. Of course, on the surface, the Raelians, if you might agree, doesn't look like a harmful group. It's got sci-fi, it's got sexual expression. They're into science, talking about cloning and things like that, but while they're really doing any money damage. But when you look at people trying to belong to something and then that getting twisted into these other things, like you said, the pressure, are people really doing what they want to do to belong? You know, a hierarchy where the older guys at the top, and it's really, when you think about it, the whole thing is designed to serve the needs of Raël, period.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whenever there was and I never met Raël, but I know that whenever there was an event on, like that Raël was at, would usually be a 2 or 3 day camp. It wasn't an issue for him. He had his choice because they were eager and keen. There was I'll never forget, there was one woman in particular, and she was probably the reason that I hung around as long as I did.
Well, you enjoyed talking to her, did you?
I enjoyed talking to her, but I also it was a very good physical, intimate connection with her.
Right. So you had a crush on her. Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, she was about 30 at the time. I'm about 20, so she's a bit older, a bit more experienced. Very attractive woman, very intelligent woman. She had degrees. She was just but just someone who I got on really, really well with. You know, we just hang out and have dinner, and you know, she'd come over, I'd go over to hers. It was an interesting sort of dynamic. But what had happened was she'd gone to one of these things where Raël was, and she sort of confided in me that she was upset because she'd offered herself to Raël, and he'd rejected her, and it was quite an emotional thing for her. She was absolutely devastated by this.
You mean like on the level that she's not accepted in the teachings, that she's not Elohim worthy because of this, or because of the beliefs of the cult? Or
I think it's almost like a bit of a, because within the group he's put on such a high pedestal. I think it's just like any celebrity sort of thing, you know, like I think she sort of thought she was going to this and she was going to sleep with Raël. But it didn't happen. She spoke to him and she offered, and he said no. And she was genuinely devastated by this. It was like, you know, someone who she was in love with had broken up with her. And I remember the conversation with her, and obviously, you know, being straight, there was never any interest in me for Raël, so I didn't understand exactly, you know, potentially, you know, there was women within the organisation that I revered to an extent, but certainly no one that I was going to. I'll put it this way: she reacted probably in the same way.
Like she lost a partner, or like she lost her lover, she lost her friend, she lost.
She'd been rejected by. It's a weird combination. I'd say like she'd been rejected by a parent, like her celebrity crush wasn't interested, and like she'd been dropped by a lover. It was all of those. It's a weird sort of thing, and. Yeah, but for her it was devastating. And look, I mean, she was a very attractive woman.
Listen, I can see now that is absolutely the most dangerous part of this cult, because they are using that as an acceptance and a non-acceptance, as a grade level, as a leveling device within the culture of this cult. And look how emotionally damaging that can be. Somebody who's been in the cult for all this time and doing everything that they're supposed to do and supporting the message and doing, the cult things. And then the cult leader just says, and there you go. You crumbled. You crumbled because you're immediately demoted to like not worthy. Like
exactly. And
all those teachings and all those things they said, like they don't apply to you anymore, right? Because you're not worthy of the Elohim, like period.
Yeah. No, exactly. It was
that's the damaging. Yeah, that's the damaging part of this that I could see, because the message is not so damaging as far as the UFO stuff and all of that. Most people are able to say, or no, find some fascination in it, if they want.
That's the same with any religion, though. I mean, if you look at Christianity on the surface, it's a group of really nice people who get together and go to church together and have great community, and they're all happy families and everyone gets along and it's somewhere to belong. But then when you dig a little bit further in and you see the ugly side of it, I think people in general, any group, you're going to get good and bad. It's just I sort of look back on a few things now, and look, it's very easy for me to sit here 20 years later and look back at what was going on when I was 19, 20 years old and go, oh, okay, yeah, maybe that wasn't so good. But me at the time was fine with it all. I look back and I was fine with it all. I can see the manipulation now. I can see the problematic side of things now. But at the time, like if I were to go back in time and say to myself 20 years ago, hey, here's what's going on, I reckon 20 years ago I probably would have gone, oh, okay, well, I'm off. Yeah. Thanks for letting me know, and I'm still going. Yeah. Because
I don't see it. It's not doing me any harm. They're not harming anything. And until you started to look at it a different way, until you saw it through somebody else's perspective, like the woman who got challenged, right? Yeah. And
what worries me is probably a lot of the younger women who are in that organization, who it's a different experience for a straight man as it is for a straight woman. There's a different experience.
I get that. No, and I think most women will understand exactly what you're saying. Yeah. That because of the environment and because of the freeness of it and all of that, and also, like you said, because of the pressure, because of it being just the way it is there, you're wondering how much choice there really is in choice and how much consent there actually is in consent.
There wasn't
you're worried about a couple of years later, the regret that you're looking back and seeing it a certain way, and you're actually putting yourself in those 18-year-old girls' shoes and saying, will they have the regret, and actually come to the conclusion that maybe that's not what they wanted to do. And I can sense that from you, and I give you great admiration for looking at it.
I could be completely wrong. And I have no doubt that there are a lot of those, the vast majority of those women who would look back on that, if they're not still in the group, I guess, with a fondness and say, well, hey, that was like I do. That was an experience. It was a period in time, and overall, it was a positive experience for me.
True, because most people will think that they
look back and go, I'm uncomfortable with a few things now, and certainly 40-year-old me, and I sort of think to some of the older guys who were there, and surely they would have been at a point where they I mean, if I know this now, surely they would have known.
True.
Now.
And I think most women going back would do the same thing you're doing. It was a good experience. It was something I don't regret experiencing. I was there. I did it. That's what it was. Not for me. I don't want to do it again. But okay.
Yeah,
I think they could grow that way.
It was a good experience, but retrospectively, I acknowledged the pressure that was placed along a lot of the younger members, myself included. I'll put it this way. If I wasn't in the mood, it probably wasn't an option for me.
Well, that's the thing, because you're talking about an environment here where they're setting up the premise where, you want to, so go ahead and do it. And then all of a sudden it's like, you want to, you really should. Like, and why don't you want to? Like, it's like a catch-22. They're taking away what they call a taboo that was existing at the time, but this is the 70s, right? So the taboo had just been lifted off of free love. Like, nobody talked about it. Nobody did that kind of stuff. The hippies, everything, the 60s coming forward. It was now the thing. You should want to experience. And like, were you a prude if you didn't?
I think it was a transition, I think, between a lot of the more conservative ideals. I think we came out of the 60s and 70s, and then it went very conservative after that.
For a while.
But then this was kind of like where people were all of a sudden, they were a lot more comfortable talking about their sexuality, expressing themselves.
It is quite interesting. And your take on it has been very interesting. I mean, the cult itself, which I will link down below so that you can actually research like some of the stuff that they actually believe in and things like that. We're focusing on a smaller aspect of it. Yeah.
Anyone can read the book and see what they believe.
Yeah.
I think the more important thing when you're talking about organizations like this is understanding what drives people into them. What keeps people
and
there.
I think that was the hook. I think you definitely nailed what was the hook. Not only was it for the young people coming in, it was the UFO thing and the aliens and being out there.
If it was a bunch of 20-year-old guys like me who were sitting around talking about aliens, I probably would have gone a few times. When it's a bunch of 20 to 30-year-old women who are there with me as
yeah, you forget to tell them that most of the time they were all naked. Yeah.
At the camps, it's generally like people are naked at the camps. But if it's just like a gathering,
not as the
house,
conventions. Don't go naked to a convention, people. Like, wait till you get invited to the camp. Okay.
Yeah. It's the best way I describe it is if you go to someone's house, it's almost like a swingers party where everyone sits around, has a chat, has something to eat, has a couple of drinks, and then it just
progressively gets warmer.
That's probably the best way. I'm probably, if there's any 20-year-old blokes who are listening, I'm probably doing a sell job for the Raëlians. So
no, please, like that's what we're not doing here. No, because actually I do think that part of it ends up to be quite damaging, because here I am, I'm listening to you tell this story about at that time in your life, it was this really great thing. But now you're looking about it and wondering what you contributed to in regards to pressure for other people.
I think it would be very different. I think it'd be very different now, because I think we know a lot more now. I think it's not just that, I think the 20-year-olds are certainly more aware of what's going on.
Of their rights, yes.
And I think that it's also a different world look, it was, if you want to go out and, because hookup culture was a thing back then, it still is now, but it was very different back then, because you would go out and, you'd be buying drinks and you'd kind of spot who you're interested in and you'd sort of be talking, a lot of small talk, a lot of all that. Whereas now, and I've seen like cousins and friends who are single do it. They'll get their phone and go swipe, couple of things. Oh yeah, I'm meeting up with such and such. Oh, like that's it. It's insane. So we didn't have that. So I think the aspect of or how hookup culture is now, and I guess the ease of it, I think would probably take away from a lot of that was there. And look, it was a time. It wasn't a like I said, it wasn't a bad experience. But I look back now and sort of go, I'm not actually comfortable with how, as much as I consider it a positive experience, I'm not comfortable with how I was treated. I'm not comfortable with how other younger people in the group were treated. And I'm certainly, it is a problematic what happened back then. I can only speak for back then. I assume there's probably not a lot of difference now, but it was problematic, and it's not good. If you've got people who are openly in that lifestyle, I don't think there's any issues. But certainly there's pressure for people who come to the group who aren't necessarily in that lifestyle. There's pressure for them to be active and partake in it. I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with how, as much as at the time it wasn't an issue for me, I'm not comfortable now looking back, seeing the manipulation and a few other things that sort of went on. I'm not comfortable with how that played out.
Do you think that is the most damaging part, or do you think some of this abuse of the sciences that they're doing also feeding people's heads?
I think people abuse science on a daily basis. I think a lot of groups, organisations, science is something that's ever changing. I think the most damaging part is to the people. I think we've always got to be people focused, people centric.
That's the thing with cults. That's my focus too, is the damage that it's doing to the actual individuals. And that's why I wanted to identify it as when I read all the articles, many people have checked into the Raëlians, and not that many people do anything about it because they consider them harmless. Even when we did our first perspective on it, we really couldn't find too much in their teachings or anything that we're going to like. Most people could go, yeah, I could go for that, or no, like that's kind of ridiculous. You could see the absurdity in some of it. Yeah. And so you really had to want to belong or believe in UFOs. You had to already be halfway there to go with Raël. Yeah. Really,
and I was, I was absolutely, I was,
because you were fascinated by the UFOs, the outer worldliness of it, right?
So, I mean, look, realistically, I was the perfect target for them because I was a young male, but it was essentially, I was what they were looking for. I was someone who was genuinely interested. I wasn't just there because I didn't go for the sex. But that's probably what kept me in it as long as it did.
Right. The intrigue, the enticement, and,
and the connections. I mean, I had some real genuine connections. Like the woman I was talking about before, who was in it. I had a real genuine, intimate connection with her. That was actually, when I look back at it, we weren't dating as such, but I would consider that probably one of the most formative relationships that I had.
It helped you in the end anyway when you saw what she went through too.
Look, that was definitely a part of it. It was, but it was. I sort of look back and I think to not only the physical side of things, but certainly the conversations and I think she helped me grow as a person because it was normally the girls I was meeting were sort of my age or a little bit younger, so I was like that sort of 18 to 20. Here was a 30-year-old woman who was highly intelligent at a different point in her life that I was at, that I had this great connection with. And I think it helped me grow as a result. So, I mean, I look back on things like that and go, okay, but then I look back at the negatives, like when she was rejected, the pressure that's put on younger women, pressure that's put on younger men, the way that when people leave, the shunning is just as bad as, anywhere else. I mean, you are just cut off, right. Or if you don't fall into line with something. I saw people who would sort of speak out against, the higher ups and say, oh, I don't think they're right with this, and they were gone.
That's another thing that puts you definitely in a cult instead of a sect or a religious belief, is that if you don't do it their way, you're out, period. Exactly. So, Chris, I just want to say this has been a very interesting conversation. And I'm glad that we had it because I wanted to approach this cult in a different way. Like anybody could tell the history of it. Anybody could tell you what they believe. Anybody could tell. Well, we wanted to actually get into, for me, what was one of the most damaging parts about it. And this was this freedom aspect of it that they're promoting that is quite enticing to people. And I'm glad that you came forward with some of the ideas that I didn't have to say for a change.
please don't think because I may have been speaking a little bit too fondly at times looking back. Please don't think that I'm encouraging or endorsing anything.
No, I think they get the point. I don't think you did.
Yeah, I'm just trying to explain what my experience as a 20-year-old, because I mean, it enticed me in, it kept me in. So, I mean, I just want to explain that.
Chris, let's be honest. You talked about an experience that you had, how you got there, how you actually got out of there, and how you actually look at it differently now. You did a great job of that. I don't think if you're worried about being an advertisement for joining the Raelians now and having like pressured sex on a regular basis, I don't think that's what you did. Okay. I think you actually did the opposite. You were honest about what it felt like at that age to do that and go through it. How the cult is actually recruiting people using that intriguing, enticing method, which would work for multitudes of people in many ages. Okay. Just to be accepted that way and not have that there. And then how you started to look at it differently, and you saw some of the pressures and you could see the damage that it was being done. You did a great job of that, and I commend you for it. And thank you for having the conversation with me.
Thank you for having me on. It's always a good conversation we have, Claire. Yes, whatever we're talking about, it's always a good conversation.
I totally agree. I enjoy my conversations with you. And that's why everyone needs to check him out over at Hereticals Cast, his new podcast type style show for great conversations. And also Hereticals in general, if you like Six Pack and the other crazy stuff we do over there. But thanks again, Chris. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this. And I hope that everybody else did too, and that they'll listen in for further episodes.